I work as a paramedic, so I'm used to driving alone at night on empty highways. Most of the time it's just me, the radio, and whatever podcast I've got playing to keep me awake during the long drives between calls. I've been doing this job for about 6 years, and I thought I'd seen everything there was to see on these roads. This happened about 8 months ago, on a Tuesday night in the middle of winter. I was driving back to the station after dropping a patient off at the county hospital, which is about 40 miles outside of town. It was around 2:30 a.m., and the roads were completely empty. Just me and this long stretch of highway that cuts through farmland and woods. The weather was terrible. Freezing rain mixed with sleet, the kind that makes the roads slick and dangerous. I was taking my time, maybe doing 45 in a 65 zone because the last thing I wanted was to end up in a ditch somewhere. About halfway back to town, I saw someone walking on the side of the road. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, because who the hell would be walking on a highway in weather like this? But as I got closer, I could see it was definitely a person, looked like a woman in a light-colored coat, walking in the same direction I was driving. I slowed down and pulled over about 20 feet ahead of her. In my line of work, you learn to help people when they're in trouble, and this was clearly someone who needed help. I rolled down the passenger window and called out, asking if she needed a ride. She didn't answer at first, just kept walking toward my car with this weird, stiff gait. When she got to the passenger door, I could see her more clearly. She was probably in her 30s, with long, dark hair that was soaked from the rain. Her coat was this pale yellow color, and it was way too thin for weather like this. But what really struck me was her expression. She wasn't shivering or looking cold like you'd expect. She was just staring straight ahead, with this completely blank look on her face, like she was sleepwalking. I asked her again if she needed help, and this time she turned to look at me. Her eyes were really dark, almost black, and she had this smile that didn't reach her eyes at all. She said, "Yes, thank you," in this really flat, emotionless voice. She got into the passenger seat without any trouble, but she didn't buckle her seatbelt or even close the door properly. I had to lean over and shut it for her. When I did, I noticed she was completely dry. Not a drop of water on her coat or in her hair, even though she'd been walking in freezing rain. I asked her where she needed to go, and she just pointed straight ahead down the highway. "Just keep driving," she said in that same flat voice. "I'll tell you when to stop." Something about the whole situation was making me really uncomfortable, but I figured she might be in shock or hypothermia or something. I've seen people act strange after exposure to cold. So I put the car in drive and started heading back toward town. The first few minutes were normal enough. She just sat there staring straight ahead, not saying anything. I tried to make conversation, asking if she'd had car trouble or if there was someone I could call for her, but she didn't respond. Then I started noticing things that didn't make sense. First, the heater was running full blast, but I couldn't feel any warmth coming from her side of the car. It was like there was this cold zone around the passenger seat that the heat couldn't penetrate. Second, when I glanced over at her, I couldn't see her breathing. Her chest wasn't moving up and down like it should be. And when I looked in the rearview mirror, I could only see the back of my own head. There was no reflection of her at all. I was starting to get really scared, but I didn't want to do anything sudden that might make the situation worse. I kept driving, trying to act normal, but my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. About 10 minutes into the ride, she turned her head to look at me. And when she did, I saw something that made my blood freeze. The side of her head that had been facing away from me was completely caved in, like she'd been in a massive car accident. I could see exposed bone and what looked like brain tissue, but she was still smiling that horrible empty smile, and she said, "Turn left at the next road." I was so terrified I could barely think straight, but I did what she said. The road she pointed to was this narrow dirt track that led into the woods. I'd driven this highway hundreds of times, and I'd never noticed this road before. As soon as I turned onto it, the temperature in the car dropped by what felt like 20 degrees. I could see my breath, and frost started forming on the inside of the windows. The woman, or whatever she was still sitting there like nothing had changed. The dirt road went on for maybe half a mile before it opened up into this small clearing, and that's when I saw it, a car wrapped around a tree, completely mangled. It looked like it had been there for a while, maybe months or even years. "This is where I need to get out," the woman said, and when I looked over at her, the damaged side of her head was even worse. I could see maggots crawling in and out of the wound. She opened the door and got out without saying anything else. I watched her walk toward the wrecked car, and as she got closer to it, she started to fade, like she was becoming transparent. By the time she reached the car, she was completely gone. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds, too scared to move. Then I threw the car in reverse and got the hell out of there as fast as I could. I drove straight to the police station and told them what I'd seen. The next day, 2 officers went out to check the location I'd described. They found the wrecked car exactly where I said it would be. The license plate came back to a woman named Jennifer Walsh, who had been reported missing 14 months earlier. According to the police report, she'd been driving home from her job at a restaurant when she disappeared during a winter storm. Her body was still in the driver's seat of the wrecked car. The coroner said she'd died instantly from massive head trauma. The officers said that based on the condition of the car and the body, the accident had happened at least a year ago. There was no way anyone could have survived it, and no way Jennifer Walsh could have been walking on that highway the night I picked her up. I never drive that route alone anymore. I always take the longer way back to town, even if it adds 20 minutes to my trip. And I've never stopped to pick up hitchhikers again, no matter how much they might need help. But sometimes, on really cold, rainy nights, I still see her in my rearview mirror, sitting in the passenger seat with that horrible smile. She never says anything, and when I turn around to look, she's never there. But I can feel the cold coming from that seat, and I know she's still trying to get someone to take her home. About 10 minutes into the ride, she turned her head to look at me, and when she did, I saw something that made my blood freeze. The side of her head that had been facing away from me was completely caved in, like she'd been in a massive car accident. I could see exposed bone and what looked like brain tissue, but she was still smiling that horrible empty smile, and she said, "Turn left at the next road." I was so terrified I could barely think straight, but I did what she said. The road she pointed to was this narrow dirt track that led into the woods. I'd driven this highway hundreds of times, and I'd never noticed this road before. As soon as I turned onto it, the temperature in the car dropped by what felt like 20 degrees. I could see my breath, and frost started forming on the inside of the windows. The woman, or whatever she was still sitting there like nothing had changed. The dirt road went on for maybe half a mile before it opened up into this small clearing, and that's when I saw it, a car wrapped around a tree, completely mangled. It looked like it had been there for a while, maybe months or even years. "This is where I need to get out," the woman said, and when I looked over at her, the damaged side of her head was even worse. I could see maggots crawling in and out of the wound. She opened the door and got out without saying anything else. I watched her walk toward the wrecked car, and as she got closer to it, she started to fade, like she was becoming transparent. By the time she reached the car, she was completely gone. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds, too scared to move. Then I threw the car in reverse and got the hell out of there as fast as I could. I drove straight to the police station and told them what I'd seen. The next day, 2 officers went out to check the location I'd described. They found the wrecked car exactly where I said it would be. The license plate came back to a woman named Jennifer Walsh, who had been reported missing 14 months earlier. According to the police report, she'd been driving home from her job at a restaurant when she disappeared during a winter storm. Her body was still in the driver's seat of the wrecked car. The coroner said she died instantly from massive head trauma. The officers said that based on the condition of the car and the body, the accident had happened at least a year ago. There was no way anyone could have survived it, and no way Jennifer Walsh could have been walking on that highway the night I picked her up. I never drive that route alone anymore. I always take the longer way back to town, even if it adds 20 minutes to my trip, and I've never stopped to pick up hitchhikers again, no matter how much they might need help. But sometimes, on really cold, rainy nights, I still see her in my rearview mirror, sitting in the passenger seat with that horrible smile. She never says anything, and when I turn around to look, she's never there. But I can feel the cold coming from that seat, and I know she's still trying to get someone to take her home. That's when I decided to take the next exit, which was coming up in about 5 miles. It was just a small rural exit that led to a grain elevator and not much else, but I figured if I got off the highway, whoever was following me would either follow me off, in which case I'd know for sure they were targeting me, or they'd keep going and I could get back on the highway once they were gone. As I approached the exit, I slowed down and put on my turn signal. I kept watching the mirrors to see what the car behind me would do. The headlights slowed down too, and when I took the exit, they followed me off the highway. Now I was really scared. The exit ramp led to this small, two-lane road that went through farmland, with a few scattered houses and not much else. At night, it was completely dark except for the occasional farmhouse light in the distance. I drove for about 2 miles on this rural road, and the headlights stayed right behind me. I was looking for somewhere to stop where there might be other people around, but everything was closed and dark. I was starting to panic, wondering what I was going to do if whoever was following me was planning to do something violent. That's when I saw the grain elevator up ahead. It was closed, but there were a few security lights that made it the brightest spot for miles around. I decided to pull into the parking lot and see what happened. I parked my truck under one of the security lights and turned off the engine. The car behind me pulled into the lot too, but instead of parking near me, it stopped about 50 yards away just at the edge of the light. I sat there for a few minutes, waiting to see what the driver would do. But nothing happened. The car just sat there with its headlights pointed at my truck. I couldn't see inside the car because the headlights were too bright, but I could tell it was a sedan of some kind, dark-colored. Finally, I decided I had to do something. I got out of my truck and started walking toward the car, planning to ask the driver what they wanted and why they'd been following me. But as soon as I stepped into the light, the car started backing up. It backed all the way to the road, then turned around and drove away. I watched the tail lights disappear into the darkness, and I thought that was the end of it. I got back in my truck and sat there for about 10 minutes, making sure the car was really gone. Then I drove back to the highway and got back on, heading east toward my destination. But about 20 minutes later, I saw them again in my mirrors. The same bright headlights, at the same distance, following me just like before. It was like the driver had just waited for me to get back on the highway and then picked up where they left off. This time I was really freaked out. I grabbed my cell phone and called 911, telling the dispatcher that someone had been following me for hours and I was afraid they were going to try to hurt me. The dispatcher said they'd send a patrol car to intercept me at the next major interchange. The next interchange was about 30 miles away. I drove as fast as I safely could, keeping an eye on my mirrors the whole time. The headlights never wavered, never changed their distance, just stayed locked on behind me like they were attached to my truck by an invisible cable. When I got to the interchange, I could see the police car waiting on the on-ramp. I pulled over and the officer got out to talk to me. I explained what had been happening, and he said he'd take a look at the car that had been following me. But when we both looked back down the highway, there was nothing there. The headlights were gone. The officer drove back about 5 miles in each direction, but he never found any car. It was like it had just vanished. The officer took a report and told me to call if it happened again. I got back on the road, and for the rest of that night I didn't see any sign of the mysterious car. But the next night in Ohio, it happened again. Same bright headlights, same exact distance, same eerie following behavior. This time I didn't bother with exit ramps or police calls. I just kept driving, hoping it would eventually go away. It followed me for about 3 hours before finally disappearing somewhere around Columbus. I never saw where it went. 1 minute it was there in my mirrors, and the next minute it was gone. I did some research when I got home, and I found out that other truckers have reported similar experiences on that stretch of highway in Kansas. There are stories going back 20 years or more about mysterious headlights that follow vehicles for hours at a time. Some people think it's the ghost of a truck driver who died in an accident on that highway back in the 1980s. Others think it's some kind of government surveillance operation. I don't know what to believe, but I know what I experienced. I still drive that route sometimes, but I always make sure to travel during daylight hours. I've never seen those headlights again, but I know they're out there somewhere, waiting for the next driver to come along on a dark, lonely night. I was driving home from my girlfriend's house one night about 2 years ago. She lived about an hour away from me, in this small town surrounded by farmland and woods. The drive between our places was mostly back roads. the kind with no street lights and very little traffic, especially late at night. It was around 1 a.m. on a Saturday, and I was about 20 minutes from my girlfriend's place when my car started acting up. The engine was making this weird knocking sound, and the temperature gauge was creeping into the red zone. I'd been having some problems with the cooling system, but I thought I'd fix them. I managed to make it another few miles before the engine started overheating badly. I could see steam coming out from under the hood, and I knew I had to stop before I did permanent damage to the engine. There was nowhere to pull off except the shoulder of this narrow 2-lane road, so I put on my hazard lights and coasted to a stop. I popped the hood and took a look, but it was too dark to see much of anything. I had a flashlight in my glove compartment, but when I went to get it, my phone was dead. I must have forgotten to charge it before I left my girlfriend's place. I was standing there trying to figure out what to do when I saw headlights approaching from the direction I'd come from. The car slowed down as it got close to me, and I was hoping maybe they'd stop and let me use their phone to call for help. The car pulled over behind mine and parked with the headlights illuminating my car. I could see it was an older sedan, maybe from the early 2000s, dark blue or black. The driver got out and walked toward me. "Having some trouble?" he called out. He was probably in his 50s, average height, wearing a baseball cap and work clothes. He seemed friendly enough, and I was grateful that someone had stopped to help. I explained about the overheating problem, and he offered to take a look. He had a much better flashlight than mine, and he seemed to know what he was doing. After poking around under the hood for a few minutes, he said it looked like a blown radiator hose. "That's not something you can fix on the side of the road," he said, "but I've got some tools and spare parts in my car. I might be able to rig something up to get you home." I was really relieved. The guy seemed like a good Samaritan, just someone who knew about cars and was willing to help a stranger. He went back to his car and started pulling out tools and what looked like automotive parts. But while he was doing that, I started noticing some things that didn't seem quite right. First, his car was running the whole time, but I couldn't hear the engine. Most cars from that era are pretty noisy when they idle, but his was completely silent. Second, even though his headlights were on and pointed right at us, they weren't casting shadows the way headlights should. Everything was lit up, but there were no dark areas behind objects like there should have been. Third, and this is what really started to creep me out, the guy's breath wasn't making any vapor in the cold air. It was probably about 40 degrees that night, cold enough that my breath was visible every time I exhaled, but his wasn't. I tried to shake off these observations and just be grateful for the help. The guy worked on my car for about 20 minutes, replacing something under the hood and adding some kind of fluid to the radiator. He seemed to know exactly what he was doing. "That should get you home," he said when he was finished, "but you'll want to get it properly fixed as soon as possible. This is just a temporary repair." I thanked him and offered to pay him for the parts and his time, but he waved me off. "Just helping out a fellow driver," he said. "We've all been there." I got back in my car and turned the key. The engine started right up, and the temperature gauge was back to normal. The guy got back in his car and waited while I pulled back onto the road. I drove for about 5 minutes, checking the gauges to make sure everything was working properly. When I looked in my rearview mirror, I could see his headlights following behind me at a reasonable distance. I figured he was just making sure I was okay before he went on his way. But after another 5 minutes, he was still there, and something about the way he was driving was starting to bother me. He was staying exactly the same distance behind me, matching my speed precisely. When I sped up, he sped up. When I slowed down, he slowed down. I started to wonder if maybe helping me had been an excuse to follow me home, to find out where I lived. There had been some break-ins in my neighborhood recently, and I'd heard about criminals who would help stranded motorists just to get information about them. I decided to test whether he was actually following me or just happened to be going in the same direction. I took a right turn onto a side road that I knew would loop back to the main road. If he was just going home, he'd keep straight. If he was following me, he'd turn too. He turned. Now I was really scared. I drove down the side road for about a mile, then took another turn, and another. Each time the headlights followed. There was no question now that this guy was deliberately following me. I was trying to figure out what to do when I remembered that there was a 24-hour gas station about 10 miles ahead. I could go there and ask the clerk to call the police, or at least get around other people so this guy couldn't do whatever he was planning to do. But as I was driving toward the gas station, something even weirder happened. I looked in my rearview mirror and the headlights were getting closer, much closer, like the guy was speeding up to catch me. I pressed down on the accelerator, trying to put some distance between us, but my car wasn't responding the way it should. The engine was running, but it felt like something was holding me back, like I was driving uphill, even though the road was flat. The headlights kept getting closer until they were right behind me, so close that they filled my entire rearview mirror. I was terrified that the guy was going to ram me from behind or try to run me off the road. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, my car lurched forward and the engine started running normally again. I shot ahead, putting distance between me and the other car. When I looked in the mirror again, the headlights were gone completely. I drove to the gas station anyway and sat in the parking lot under the bright lights for about 20 minutes, trying to calm down and figure out what had just happened. I looked at my phone, but it was still dead, so I couldn't call anyone. When I finally felt safe enough to continue home, I took a completely different route, using main roads with more traffic. I didn't see the mysterious car again. The next morning, I called my mechanic to schedule an appointment to get my car properly repaired. But when I popped the hood to check the work the stranger had done, there was nothing there. No new hose, no signs that anyone had worked on the engine. Everything looked exactly the way it had before my car broke down. But the car was running perfectly. The overheating problem was completely gone and it's been fine ever since. My mechanic said there was nothing wrong with the cooling system and he couldn't find any evidence that it had ever overheated. I never figured out who the man was or why he followed me, but sometimes I wonder if he was even real or if something else was at work that night. All I know is that my car was fixed by someone or something that shouldn't have been able to fix it, and I've never felt completely safe driving alone on dark roads since then.